Hey everyone, Harry here to talk about Ken Chesebro and the whole mess over who is tried together and who is tried separately in Fulton County. Okay, remember, 19 defendants. Generally, prosecutors want to try everyone together. Fonnie Willis is saying she wants to. There's some upper limit where it just gets to be bedlam and a circus, although it hasn't happened yet, but we can expect many of these defendants to plead out and cooperate. So let's say it's down to about 10 who are, we have to figure out. That's just a wild ass guess. But the question comes, how are they tried and when are they tried? So Ken Chesebro played an interesting gambit right out of the box. He said, I want a speedy trial. That's his right under Georgia law. And what it means is he's entitled for the jury to start to be sworn in by the end of the next grand jury session, or maybe the beginning of the next, but it's basically early November. And so the judge dutifully set a jury impaneling to try to choose the jury in advance of that in October 23rd, I think. And Chesebro uses speedy trial, and man, that's warp speed to start this trial. But I think he's assuming one thing and hoping for one thing. The thing he's assuming is it's very, very hard for him to get it together by then, but it's even harder for Fulton County, which has the burden of proof. And so, he'll roll the dice. But the reason he wants to roll the dice, he wants to be, as many defendants want to be, alone. He wants to be able to point the finger at other people who aren't there, the so-called empty chair, say these other lawyers did it. I was just sort of working in the field, and he was doing stuff in Wisconsin, and he just started lobbing in memos and the like. But those memos, as it turned out, were really formed the architecture of the whole plan. He fed them to John Eastman, and they became a big part of what the defendants here were trying to get, especially Pence, to do. That was based on Chesebro's handiwork, but he wants to sort of portray himself as just a lawyer, out in the hustings there, not really doing very much. Okay, so that's the plan. But here comes Sidney Powell, and right behind her, John Eastman. Two of the most, I gotta say, objectively unattractive co-defendants out there, the very people you don't want to be in the lifeboat with. So Chesebro had this clever gambit, and he's in a sort of, little canoe on his own, and here comes Sidney Powell and John Eastman to jump in. They say, we want a speedy trial too. And they're entitled in the same way Chesebro is. And what the general point that this makes is, it's one thing to get a speedy trial, also one thing to get removal. It's another thing to get severance. So severance, being separated from other defendants, is not automatic. In fact, the presumption is against. And there's only a few reasons that really justify it. A perfect example is if you're with that another defendant, evidence will come in against you that wouldn't if you're all alone, because it will come in against your co-defendant. And even if the judge tells the jury to disregard it, there's no way it will prejudice you. That would be a good example. Or there's just so much confusion with a lot of defendants about what the law and evidence is. But here, they're all being charged under the same RICO scheme. So what Fonnie Willis is saying to the court is, you still have to decide severance, because believe it or not, the state of play now is 19 defendants sort of out there maybe in March. Chesebro says, give me, please, a speedy trial, which sets it in October. Right now, as best anyone can tell, everyone goes with them. They're all, and this is what Willis says we're ready to do. All 19, there's one solid trial date set, and there's no motion for severance that's been approved of yet. And really, I don't think any good ones that have been made. So now, how are we going to disentangle these 19 or however many it turns out to be defendants and not have them all tried together? Well, Chesebro has made an effort, as has Donald Trump. They filed motions to sever. You can see Chesebro, the best laid plans. He's really fit to be tied. That wanting to be on his own, he's got to be not just together, but with Sidney Powell and John Eastman. Oh man, the prospects that he'll get convicted along with them, and they're really in many ways not just a lot of evidence against them, but very sort of unappealing defendants. So what he said in his motion to sever is, and so far it's only been, we think John Eastman's coming, but only Sidney Powell's made the motion. He says, I had nothing to do with Sidney Powell. I've never even met Sidney Powell. My conduct was completely afield from her. But guess what? That's not a reason to sever. That's a reason that he might feel he shouldn't have been put in the whole RICO conspiracy. But that's what it means to be in a RICO conspiracy. All these different people can be lumped together under this sort of sprawling conduct where basically they all just have to agree with the unlawful aim of this criminal enterprise, but they don't have to know each other or whatever. So he's made a pitch to be severed that, to my mind, is not very strong. And Donald Trump, likewise, he said, this is too soon. My due process rights would be abridged. But they're not being abridged for Ken Chesebro. And by definition, the Georgia Speedy Trial Act, unless it's unconstitutional, gives you enough time. Bare minimum, but gives you enough time. So that doesn't seem a good argument for Trump either. So we got a real puzzle for the court, Judge McAfee, to work out how he's going to sever them, what will be the basis. And they've got to come forward, the individual defendants, and make their arguments. But in particular, will the speedy trial defendants and anyone who claimed it all be brought together, very much to Ken Chesebro's chagrin in particular. But the game here is to try to separate them out, and the prosecution game is to try to lump them together unless it totally makes a trial unfair or makes it hard in terms of the law to decide who's guilty and innocent and who's innocent, but they could all be guilty. So we've got a very interesting situation where we got to assume some of these guys are going to get plucked apart, but that means severance, and that means specific reasons and arguments from defendants. And to my mind, we haven't heard them yet. And that's what's going to be very soon and piled pretty high on Judge McAfee's plate. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.